Marcus Sullivan had spent 25 years reading the wilderness like an open book, but lately the pages felt blank. At 52, the former Yellowstone Park ranger carried himself with the weathered dignity of a man who'd walked countless miles through untamed country, yet his steel-gray eyes held a hollowness that hadn't been there 3 years ago. The lines around those eyes had deepened not from squinting at distant horizons, but from sleepless nights and the weight of unbearable loss. His cabin sat on 40 acres of pristine Montana wilderness, where the Blackfoot Valley stretched toward the peaks of Glacier National Park. It was the kind of place Jake had always dreamed of calling home permanently, far from the crowds and noise of civilization. The log structure, built with Marcus's own hands during happier times, commanded a view of rolling hills carpeted in lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. A place where a man could think, heal, or in Marcus's case, hide from a world that had taken everything that mattered. The silence inside the cabin was deafening. Catherine's reading chair remained exactly where she'd left it 3 years ago, a bookmark still marking her place in a novel she'd never finish. The kitchen table, built for family dinners, now held only Marcus's solitary meals and an ever-present bottle of whiskey that helped him sleep. But it was Jake's room that cut deepest, rock climbing gear hanging on hooks, expedition maps still pinned to the walls, dreams frozen in time like a museum to youth and possibility. Marcus had retired early from the Park Service after the accident, unable to face the mountains where his 16-year-old son had fallen. The irony wasn't lost on him that Jake had died doing what Marcus had taught him to love, exploring the vertical world of granite and sky. The guilt was a constant companion, whispering reminders of the overtime shift he'd chosen over a weekend climbing trip, the last invitation Jake had extended that Marcus had declined. These days he worked sporadically as a wildlife consultant, his reputation for understanding animal behavior still opening doors when he needed them opened. But mostly, he existed in the space between his past and whatever future might remain, moving through each day with the mechanical precision of someone going through the motions of living without actually participating in life. The October evening had been like any other. A trip to town for supplies, the radio playing old country songs that reminded him of Catherine, the familiar weight of solitude settling over him as he drove the winding mountain highway home. He'd been thinking about Jake again, wondering if his son would have followed in his footsteps as a ranger, when fate placed something impossible in his path. Something that would remind him that even in the deepest wilderness of grief, life had a way of presenting second chances to those brave enough to take them. The wolf's eyes had sparked recognition in places Marcus thought had gone permanently dark, awakening possibilities he'd assumed were buried forever with his family. Marcus couldn't leave the wolf to die on that desolate stretch of highway. Something in those amber eyes had reached through his carefully constructed walls of isolation and grabbed hold of his conscience with an iron grip. He wrapped the massive animal in his emergency blanket, surprised by the creature's calm acceptance of human touch. Most wild wolves would fight even when dying, but this one seemed to understand that help had arrived. The drive back to his cabin became a race against time. The wolf's breathing grew more labored with each passing mile, and Marcus found himself talking to the unconscious animal the way he used to comfort Jake during childhood fevers. "Stay with me, big guy. We're almost home." The words felt foreign after years of silence, but they came naturally, as if some dormant part of his soul was awakening. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived within an hour of his frantic phone call, her veterinary bag in one hand and a look of weary concern on her face. She'd been Marcus's friend since her early days as a Park Service vet, and she'd watched him retreat from the world after losing his family. At 48, Sarah carried herself with the efficient confidence of someone who'd spent decades saving animals that others had given up on. "Marcus, "This isn't a regular wolf," she said, running her hands over the animal's massive frame as it lay unconscious on his kitchen table. "Look at the bone structure, the size of the skull. This is a wolf-dog hybrid, probably 75% wolf, 25% domestic dog, likely Alaskan Malamute based on the coat pattern and build." The examination revealed more troubling details. The animal showed classic signs of strychnine poisoning, muscle spasms, dilated pupils, and respiratory distress. Someone had tried to kill this magnificent creature, and they'd nearly succeeded. But as Sarah administered activated charcoal and supportive care, she discovered something that made her pause. "Marcus, come look at this." Sarah parted the thick fur behind the wolf's left ear, revealing a small, barely visible incision that had healed weeks ago. "There's something embedded here. Feels like a microchip, but it's larger than the standard pet identification chips." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't just any wolf. It was someone's property, someone's experiment, someone's secret. The poisoning wasn't random cruelty. It was attempted murder. And now, by saving this animal, Marcus had unknowingly inserted himself into a story he didn't yet understand. "Sarah, what does Montana law say about wolf-dog hybrids?" Her expression grew serious. "They're illegal to own without special federal permits. The state considers them dangerous and unpredictable. If Fish and Wildlife finds out you have him here, you could face $10,000 in fines and up to 6 months in jail." Marcus looked down at the unconscious animal. Even sedated, there was something remarkable about the creature's presence, an almost human-like dignity that commanded respect. "What if I just release him when he's healthy?" A hybrid, this socialized to humans, wouldn't survive in the wild. He's too accustomed to human contact. And Marcus, look at his teeth. Sarah gently opened the wolf's mouth, revealing teeth that showed signs of regular veterinary care. This animal has been in captivity for most, if not all, of his life. Releasing him would be a death sentence. Over the next 3 days, Marcus watched the wolf fight its way back to consciousness with a determination that reminded him of Jake's stubborn refusal to give up on anything he set his mind to. When those amber eyes finally opened and focused on Marcus's face, the connection was immediate and profound. The wolf didn't show fear or aggression. Instead, it studied Marcus with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. Marcus named him Ranger after Jake's childhood dream of becoming a park ranger like his father. It felt right, somehow, as if this wounded creature represented the bridge between Marcus's broken past and whatever future lay ahead. Ranger's recovery revealed behaviors that astounded both Marcus and Sarah. The wolf understood basic commands without training, could open simple door latches with his dew claw, and showed a level of problem-solving ability that neither had ever witnessed in a wild animal. When Marcus read aloud in the evenings, a habit left over from Jake's childhood, Ranger would lie at his feet, head tilted as if genuinely listening to the stories. Most remarkably, Ranger seemed to sense Marcus's emotional state with uncanny accuracy. On the nights when grief hit hardest, when the whiskey couldn't quite numb the pain of missing his son, Ranger would rest his massive head on Marcus's lap and remain perfectly still until the storm passed. It was as if the wolf understood loss on a level that transcended species. But even as the bond between them strengthened, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Ranger's past was catching up to them. Strange vehicles had been spotted on the highway near his property, and Sarah mentioned that someone had been asking questions about wolf treatments at her clinic. Whatever secret Ranger carried, someone was willing to kill to protect it. The microchip hidden in Ranger's ear told a story that neither Marcus nor Sarah were prepared to hear. When Sarah finally extracted it using a specialized scanner borrowed from the university veterinary lab, the data revealed a trail that led directly into the darkest corners of illegal wildlife trafficking. The chip contained tracking coordinates, research codes, and most disturbing of all, a project designation, Lupus 7, Subject R47. The name attached to the research protocols made Sarah's blood run cold. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a once respected wildlife geneticist whose career had taken a sharp turn toward controversy 5 years earlier. Sarah remembered reading about Elena's groundbreaking work on wolf behavior modification, research that had suddenly ceased after a family tragedy that made national headlines. Elena Vasquez had been hiking with her 8-year-old daughter Isabella in Alaska's Denali Wilderness when they encountered a pack of wolves protecting their den. The attack was swift and merciless. Isabella died despite Elena's desperate attempts to fight off the animals with nothing but hiking poles and maternal fury. The image of her daughter's torn body haunted every moment of Elena's existence afterward, transforming grief into an obsession that consumed her brilliant mind. What the scientific community didn't know was that Elena had never stopped her research. If anything, Isabella's death had driven her to pursue her work with a single-minded determination that bordered on madness. She'd established a secret facility in an abandoned copper mine outside Kalispell, Montana, where she conducted experiments that would have horrified her former colleagues. Elena's twisted logic was simple. If she could create wolves that maintained their natural abilities but possessed the loyalty and obedience of domestic dogs, she could prevent future tragedies like Isabella's death. Her hybrid breeding program had produced dozens of animals over the past 3 years, each one sold to wealthy private collectors who viewed exotic pets as status symbols. But Ranger had been different from the beginning. Elena's assistant, Maria Santos, had noticed it first. The way Ranger seemed to understand human speech patterns beyond simple commands. How he could manipulate complex puzzle boxes designed for primates. And most unsettling of all, the emotional intelligence he displayed when interacting with humans. Ranger had formed an attachment to Maria that went beyond the typical handler-animal relationship, greeting her with what could only be described as joy and showing genuine concern when she was upset. Maria, a single mother from Guatemala who'd taken the job to support her teenage son, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Elena's methods. The facility housed nearly 20 wolf-dog hybrids in conditions that barely met basic care standards, and Elena's experiments had become progressively more invasive. When Ranger began demonstrating behaviors that suggested he could potentially expose the operation, attempting to use a telephone when Elena wasn't present, showing recognition of maps and photographs, Elena made a decision that shattered Maria's last vestige of loyalty. "Terminate subject R47, Elena had ordered with the clinical detachment of someone who'd lost touch with basic humanity. "He's become too unpredictable, too aware." Maria couldn't bring herself to follow through with Elena's command. Instead, she'd given Ranger a carefully measured dose of strychnine, enough to incapacitate him but not enough to kill, and dumped him on Highway 89. She'd chosen that particular stretch of road because she remembered Marcus Sullivan from years earlier, when her son Carlos had been friends with Jake. Marcus had always been kind to the immigrant families in the area, and Maria prayed that if anyone would help a dying animal, it would be the former park ranger who'd lost so much himself. The anonymous tip that led Marcus to Ranger's location hadn't been coincidence. It had been Maria's desperate attempt to save a creature she'd grown to love while protecting herself and her son from Elena's increasingly violent paranoia. She'd watched from a distance as Marcus loaded Ranger into his truck, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a prayer for them both. Now, weeks later, as Elena discovered that Ranger had survived and was recovering in Marcus's care, her obsession reached dangerous new heights. The wolf dog represented not just a failed experiment, but a potential witness to her illegal activities. Ranger could lead authorities to her facility, expose her entire operation, and destroy the work she believed was Isabella's only memorial. Elena assembled a team of 3 men, former military contractors who asked no questions and left no evidence. Their mission was simple: retrieve or eliminate subject R-47 before he could compromise the operation. Elena convinced herself that what she was doing was necessary, that the survival of her research was more important than the life of one stubborn ranger and his pet. She studied satellite images of Marcus's property, noting the isolated location and limited escape routes. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was planning to destroy another father-child relationship. But Elena's capacity for empathy had died with Isabella in those Alaskan mountains. All that remained was the cold calculation of a woman who'd traded her humanity for the illusion of control over nature's cruelest impulses. As Elena finalized her plans, Marcus was beginning to understand that his quiet life of grief and solitude was about to end. Ranger's presence had already changed him in ways he was only beginning to recognize, awakening protective instincts that had laid dormant since Jake's death. The wolf dog had become more than a rescued animal. He'd become the family Marcus thought he'd lost forever. The collision between Elena's obsession and Marcus's newfound purpose was inevitable, set in motion by choices made in laboratories and on lonely highways, driven by love and loss, and the terrible things people do when they believe the ends justify any means. The first week of November brought an unexpected warmth to the Montana wilderness, as if nature herself was conspiring to extend the healing time between Marcus and Ranger. Each morning began with the same ritual. Marcus would wake to find the massive wolf dog sitting patiently by his bedside, amber eyes alert and watchful, as if standing guard over dreams that had grown less tormented since Ranger's arrival. Marcus had initially set up a makeshift bed for Ranger in the living room, but the wolf had other ideas. On the third night, Marcus found him lying on the rug beside Jake's bed, head resting on his massive paws, staring at the climbing gear that still hung on the walls. There was something profound in that moment, the way Ranger seemed to understand that this room held sacred memories, treating the space with a reverence that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. "You know, don't you?" Marcus whispered, settling into Jake's desk chair. "You know this was his room?" Ranger's response was to lift his head and rest it on the edge of the bed, eyes never leaving Marcus's face. It was then that Marcus began talking, really talking, for the first time since the accident. He told Ranger about Jake's dreams of becoming a park ranger, about the climbing expeditions they'd planned but never taken, about the guilt that ate at him every day for choosing work over time with his son. The wolf listened with an attention that seemed almost supernatural, occasionally tilting his head or shifting position as if following the emotional flow of Marcus's words. When Marcus's voice broke describing the phone call about Jake's fall, Ranger moved closer, pressing his warm body against Marcus's legs in what could only be described as comfort. As the days passed, Ranger's remarkable intelligence became increasingly apparent. He learned to open the cabin doors by manipulating the handles with his dew claw, mastered the art of turning on the outdoor water spigot when his bowl was empty, and most astoundingly, began responding to complex verbal instructions that he'd never been taught. When Marcus said, "Ranger, can you get my boots from the porch?" the wolf would disappear and return with the requested item, tail wagging with what appeared to be pride in his accomplishment. Dr. Sarah Chen visited regularly, ostensibly to monitor Ranger's recovery, but increasingly drawn by the remarkable bond developing between man and wolf. She'd brought her tablet one evening to show Marcus research on wolf-dog hybrid intelligence. and they'd watched in amazement as Ranger positioned himself to see the screen, apparently fascinated by videos of wolves in their natural habitat. "Marcus, I've been a veterinarian for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this," Sarah said, watching Ranger carefully examine the photographs she'd brought of various wolf subspecies. The way he processes visual information, his problem-solving abilities, the emotional intelligence he displays, it's unprecedented. But their peaceful existence was increasingly shadowed by signs that Ranger's past was catching up to them. Marcus had installed motion-activated cameras around his property after years of monitoring wildlife, and the footage from the past week showed disturbing patterns. The same black SUV had been spotted 3 times on the access road, always at dawn or dusk when visibility was poor. Tire tracks near the property boundary suggested someone had been conducting surveillance, and Sarah reported that a woman claiming to be from the university had visited her clinic, asking detailed questions about hybrid wolf treatments. The breakthrough came when Ranger demonstrated an ability that left both Marcus and Sarah speechless. Marcus had been struggling with a jigsaw puzzle, one of Catherine's favorites that he'd started during a particularly difficult evening when Ranger approached the table. The wolf studied the pieces with intense concentration, then carefully picked up a corner piece in his teeth and placed it in the correct position. Over the next hour, Ranger methodically helped complete sections of the puzzle, his spatial reasoning abilities rivaling those of the most intelligent domestic dogs. "This isn't normal hybrid behavior," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even the most intelligent wolves don't demonstrate this level of abstract thinking. Someone has been conducting advanced behavioral training, possibly for years." The implications were chilling. If Ranger had been part of some extended research program, his current freedom represented a significant financial loss to whoever owned him. More troubling was the realization that Ranger's remarkable abilities made him incredibly valuable, valuable enough that someone might kill to recover their investment. Marcus began taking precautions, varying his routine and staying alert for signs of surveillance. He'd lived too long in the wilderness to ignore his instincts, and every fiber of his being screamed that danger was approaching. The irony wasn't lost on him that after 2 years of wishing for an end to his pain, he now had something precious to protect. One evening, as autumn gave way to winter's first tentative snowfall, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. He sat at his kitchen table with a stack of legal documents Sarah had helped him obtain, application forms for a federal permit to legally own a wolf-dog hybrid. The process would be lengthy and expensive, requiring inspections, veterinary certifications, and approval from multiple agencies, but it was Ranger's only path to legitimate freedom. "What do you think, boy?" Marcus asked, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "Want to make this official?" Ranger's response was to place his massive paw on the application papers, leaving a muddy print that made Marcus laugh. The first genuine laughter that had echoed through the cabin since Jake's death. In that moment, Marcus realized that Ranger had accomplished something he'd thought impossible. The wolf had helped him remember how to hope. But their quiet evening was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the cabin. Marcus extinguished the lights and moved to the window, Ranger immediately at his side, body tense and alert. 3 black SUVs were ascending the winding drive, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. This wasn't a social visit or a routine inspection. This was something much more dangerous. "Easy, Ranger," Marcus whispered, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace. "We knew this day might come." As the vehicles surrounded the cabin, Marcus caught glimpses of their occupants through the snow-frosted windows. These weren't government officials or local law enforcement. These were private contractors, the kind of men who specialized in problems that required solutions outside the boundaries of legal procedure. The lead vehicle's passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out, her silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. Dr. Elena Vasquez had come to reclaim her property, and Marcus realized with crystal clarity that she wasn't planning to leave any witnesses. The research papers scattered across his kitchen table suddenly felt like evidence at a crime scene, and Ranger's remarkable intelligence transformed from a miracle into a death sentence. Ranger seemed to sense the danger as well, his hackles rising as he positioned himself between Marcus and the door. The wolf's behavior had changed. Gone was the gentle companion of the past weeks, replaced by something wild and protective, a creature willing to fight for the bond they'd forged in the Montana wilderness. As Boots approached the porch and voices murmured in the darkness outside, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He wouldn't let them take Ranger without a fight. The wolf had given him back his capacity to love, had shown him that family could be found in the most unexpected places, and had proven that redemption was possible even for a broken man who'd lost everything that mattered. The gentle tapping on his door carried the politeness of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. But Marcus Sullivan had spent a lifetime in these mountains, and he knew paths through the wilderness that didn't appear on any map. If Elena Vasquez wanted Ranger, she'd have to catch them first. "Mr. Sullivan, we know you're in there." The voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, cutting through the Montana night like a blade. "We're here about the animal you've been harboring. We can resolve this situation peacefully if you cooperate." Marcus recognized the voice immediately, Dr. Elena Vasquez, though he'd never met her in person. Her reputation in wildlife research circles had preceded her fall from grace, and now, seeing her silhouette against the porch light, he understood why Ranger had begun trembling beside him. The wolf's reaction wasn't fear, it was recognition, the kind of deep, cellular memory that came from prolonged trauma. "There's no animal here," Marcus called back, his hand steady on his rifle despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "You're trespassing on private property." Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Subject R47 carries a tracking chip registered to my research facility. He's stolen property, Mr. Sullivan, and harboring him makes you an accessory to theft. Return him now, and we can forget this unfortunate misunderstanding." The casual way she referred to Ranger as a subject and property sent rage coursing through Marcus's system. This magnificent creature, who'd shown more emotional intelligence and loyalty than most humans, was nothing more than a laboratory experiment to this woman. The realization crystallized everything Marcus had been feeling but couldn't articulate. Ranger wasn't just a rescued animal, he was family. "His name is Ranger," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd spent decades facing down dangerous wildlife and uncooperative poachers. "And he's not going anywhere." The response was immediate and terrifying. Floodlights blazed to life, turning the cabin's windows into blazing rectangles and casting harsh shadows across the interior. Men in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't researchers or animal control officers, they were mercenaries, the kind of people Elena had hired when legal methods failed. Ranger's transformation was instantaneous. The gentle companion who'd spent weeks learning to trust and love became something primal and dangerous, his hackles rising as a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. But even in his protective fury, the wolf remained focused on Marcus, positioning himself to shield his human from whatever was coming. "The cabin is surrounded," Elena called out, her voice now carrying a harder edge. "You have 60 seconds to send the animal out, or we're coming in." Marcus knew these weren't empty threats. Through the window he could see at least 6 men taking positions around the cabin, their equipment suggesting they were prepared for a siege. But Marcus also knew something they didn't: the wilderness surrounding his property better than any map could convey. Years of hiking these trails with Jake had taught him every game path, every ravine, every hidden route through the forest. "Ranger, we're leaving," Marcus whispered, moving toward the back of the cabin where a basement door opened onto a narrow trail that wound through dense pine forest. "Stay close to me, boy. We're going home." The irony of his words wasn't lost on him. They were already home, but Elena's arrival had turned their sanctuary into a trap. True home, Marcus realized, wasn't a place but the bond between them, something that could survive anywhere as long as they stayed together. The basement door opened silently on hinges Marcus had oiled countless times during his years of solitude. The trail beyond was invisible in the darkness, but Marcus could have walked it blindfolded. Ranger seemed to understand the need for stealth, his massive paws finding purchase on the rocky ground without disturbing a single loose stone. They'd made it 50 yards into the forest when the assault began. Elena's patience had expired, and the sound of splintering wood echoed across the valley as her team breached the cabin's front door. Shouts and the harsh beams of flashlights followed as they discovered their quarry had vanished. "They're gone," the voice carried across the wilderness with military precision. "Trail leads north into the forest. 3 teams fan out. They can't have gone far." But Marcus had advantages his pursuers couldn't match. He knew which paths would support their weight and which would betray their presence with loose scree. He understood how sound carried in these mountains, where the wind would mask their movement and where it would amplify the smallest noise. Most importantly, he was fighting for something more precious than money or scientific advancement. He was protecting family. The chase through the Flathead wilderness became a deadly game of cat and mouse played across 8 miles of rugged terrain. Marcus led Ranger through creek beds that would mask their scent, over rocky ridges that left no tracks, and through dense stands of lodgepole pine where the darkness swallowed them completely. Behind them, flashlight beams swept the forest like hungry predators, always close but never quite close enough. Ranger proved to be the perfect companion for their desperate flight. His wolf heritage gave him night vision far superior to their human pursuers, and he seemed to anticipate Marcus's intended route with uncanny accuracy. When Marcus paused to catch his breath behind a fallen log, Ranger would already be scanning the darkness ahead, his body language communicating safe passages and potential dangers with subtle shifts in posture. But Elena's team was persistent and well-equipped. Their radio chatter revealed military training and expensive night vision equipment that gradually closed the distance between hunter and hunted. As dawn approached, Marcus realized they were being herded toward Cascade Falls, Jake's favorite climbing spot and the end of every trail in this section of wilderness. The falls were spectacular in daylight, a 100-foot cascade that plunged into a crystal-clear pool surrounded by granite walls. But in the pre-dawn darkness, they represented something much more ominous, a dead end with nowhere left to run. The sound of rushing water would mask their pursuers' approach until it was too late, and the rocky amphitheater around the falls would echo every sound, making stealth impossible. As they reached the overlook above the falls, Marcus could see Elena herself emerging from the forest below, flanked by 2 of her contractors. She'd anticipated their route perfectly, using her team to drive them toward this natural trap like wolves herding elk toward a cliff. The comparison wasn't lost on Marcus. Elena had become the predator she'd once studied, using pack tactics to corner her prey. "There's nowhere left to run, Mr. Sullivan," Elena called out, her voice carrying easily over the sound of falling water. "Return my property, and I give you my word that you'll be allowed to leave unharmed." Ranger pressed against Marcus's leg, his body vibrating with tension as he faced the woman who'd created him only to order his death. The wolf's amber eyes reflected the first light of dawn, and in them, Marcus saw something that took his breath away. Not fear or submission, but the same protective fire that had blazed when those eyes first opened on Highway 89. The confrontation at Cascade Falls stripped away all pretense, leaving three broken souls standing on the precipice of tragedy. Elena Vasquez emerged from the shadows like a specter from Marcus's worst nightmares, her once beautiful face carved into harsh lines by years of obsession and grief. At 45, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd replaced human warmth with scientific calculation, but her eyes betrayed the madness that had consumed her since Isabella's death. "You don't understand what you're protecting," Elena said, her voice carrying across the misty air above the falls. "That animal isn't a pet. It's a weapon, a predator bred for intelligence and trained for absolute obedience. Every day you keep him alive, you're endangering innocent families like mine once was." Marcus felt Ranger tense beside him. The wolf's body coiled like a spring as he faced the woman who'd shaped his existence. But there was no aggression in Ranger's posture, only a profound sadness that seemed to mirror Marcus's own grief. The wolf understood, perhaps better than the humans around him, that Elena's hatred stemmed from a pain too deep to heal. "His name is Ranger," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the rifle trained on them from the forest edge. "And he's the gentlest creature I've ever known. Whatever you did to him, whatever experiments you conducted, you failed to destroy his capacity for love." Elena's laugh was brittle as breaking glass. "Love? You think what you see is love? It's conditioning, Mr. Sullivan. Years of behavioral modification designed to create the perfect companion animal. Every gesture of affection, every moment of apparent emotion, it's all programmed responses." But even as she spoke, Elena's certainty wavered. She'd watched the footage her surveillance team had captured over the past weeks, seen Ranger's interactions with Marcus through telephoto lenses and hidden cameras. The wolf's behavior defied every principle of her conditioning protocols, displaying genuine emotional responses that couldn't be explained by training alone. "Isabella was 8 years old," Elena continued, her voice cracking as she spoke her daughter's name. "She loved animals, wanted to be a veterinarian just like Dr. Chen. We were hiking in Denali when the pack found us. I watched my daughter die, Mr. Sullivan. I held her broken body while those monsters disappeared into the wilderness, and I swore that no other parent would endure what I endured." Marcus felt his anger dissolve into something deeper, recognition of a fellow traveler on the road of unbearable loss. "I lost my son, too," he said quietly. "Jake was 16 when he fell climbing these very mountains. The guilt almost destroyed me." For a moment, Elena's mask slipped, revealing the devastated mother beneath the cold scientist. "Then you understand why I can't let you keep him. Ranger represents 3 years of research, millions of dollars in development. He's the prototype for a new generation of controllable wolves, animals that can serve humans without the risk of attack." "No," Marcus said, stepping protectively in front of Ranger. "He represents something you've forgotten how to recognize, the possibility of healing. This wolf didn't just save his own life when I found him dying on that highway. He saved mine." Elena raised her tranquilizer gun with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the weight of her obsession. "Step away from the animal, Mr. Sullivan. I won't ask again." But Ranger had heard enough. The wolf stepped forward, placing himself between Elena and Marcus with a deliberate calm that spoke of absolute loyalty. His amber eyes fixed on Elena's face, and for the first time since Isabella's death, she found herself looking into the eyes of a wolf without feeling hatred. What she saw there broke her remaining resolve. Intelligence, yes, but also profound sadness and an understanding that transcended species barriers. Ranger wasn't looking at her as an enemy. He was looking at her as a fellow creature trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The recognition was so unexpected, so fundamentally human, that Elena's hands began to shake. "You can't be real," she whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process what her heart was telling her. Everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, it was to prevent another tragedy like Isabella's. The only tragedy here, Marcus said gently, is that you've been so focused on controlling wolves that you forgot they're capable of choice. Ranger chose to trust me, chose to love despite everything you put him through. That's not conditioning, that's hope. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger as her entire worldview collapsed around her. 3 years of research, countless sleepless nights, millions of dollars spent chasing the illusion of control, all of it meaningless in the face of one wolf's capacity for forgiveness. The shot that followed would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected. The forest erupted in chaos as Ranger launched himself forward, not in attack, but in protection, his massive body intercepting the tranquilizer dart meant for Marcus. The overdose that followed would prove fatal, but in those final moments, Ranger accomplished what no amount of scientific research could achieve. He taught his creator that love, not control, was the answer to preventing tragedy. Time seemed to stop as Ranger's massive body hit the ground, the tranquilizer dart buried deep in his shoulder where it had been meant for Marcus. The dose Elena had prepared was calculated for a human's body weight, far too much for even a wolf of Ranger's size to survive. Marcus dropped to his knees beside his fallen companion, his hands trembling as he felt for a pulse that was already growing weak and erratic. "What have you done?" Marcus whispered, his voice breaking as he gathered Ranger's head into his lap. The wolf's amber eyes were still conscious, still focused on Marcus's face with that same unwavering loyalty that had defined their bond from the first moment they'd met on Highway 89. Elena stood frozen, the tranquilizer gun slipping from her nerveless fingers as the reality of what she'd done crashed over her like a physical blow. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She'd meant to sedate Marcus, to reclaim her property without violence, but Ranger's protective instincts had turned her careful plan into a death sentence for the very creature she'd spent years creating. He wasn't supposed to. Elena's voice trailed off as she watched Marcus cradle the dying wolf with the tenderness of a father holding his child. The parallel to her own loss struck her with devastating clarity. She was about to destroy another parent-child bond, just as the wolves had destroyed hers with Isabella. Ranger's breathing grew more labored with each passing second, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. With tremendous effort, the wolf lifted one massive paw and placed it on Marcus's chest, directly over his heart. The gesture was unmistakable. A final gift of comfort from a creature who'd spent his last moments thinking not of his own pain, but of his human's grief. "Stay with me, Ranger," Marcus pleaded, his tears falling onto the wolf's fur. "Please don't leave me alone again. I can't lose another son." The words hung in the mountain air like a prayer, and Elena felt something inside her chest crack open. Son. Marcus had called Ranger his son, and the devastating sincerity in his voice reminded her of her own desperate pleas as she'd held Isabella's broken body in that Alaskan wilderness. The rage and obsession that had driven her for 5 years suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless in the face of this man's raw grief. But even as Ranger's life ebbed away, he managed one final act that would change everything. Using the last of his strength, the wolf turned his head toward a patch of soft earth beside the waterfall and began scraping weakly with his paw. Marcus, thinking Ranger was simply in his death throes, almost dismissed the gesture until he realized there was a pattern to the wolf's movements. Numbers. Ranger was scratching numbers into the dirt with his dying breath. "Elena, look at this," Marcus called out, his voice filled with wonder despite his grief. "He's trying to tell us something." Elena approached cautiously, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. The numbers Ranger had scratched were clearly intentional. 40655500187. It took her a moment to recognize them, but when she did, her face went white with shock. "That's Maria's phone number," she whispered. "Maria Santos, my research assistant. How could he possibly know?" The implications hit them both simultaneously. Ranger hadn't just been a test subject in Elena's facility. He'd been a witness. He'd observed, learned, and remembered details that no ordinary animal could process. More importantly, he'd somehow understood that Maria represented a path to justice, a way to expose the horrors Elena had inflicted on dozens of other creatures just like him. As if summoned by their realization, the sound of helicopters filled the air above Cascade Falls. Elena's face filled with panic as she recognized the distinctive markings of federal law enforcement aircraft. Someone had called in the cavalry, and her carefully hidden operation was about to be exposed to the world. "Maria," Elena breathed, understanding finally dawning. She must have contacted the authorities when she realized I'd come after Ranger. Marcus looked down at the wolf in his arms, seeing past the dying animal to the incredible intelligence that had been hidden beneath. Ranger had known this moment would come. Somehow, he'd understood that his death would serve a greater purpose, exposing Elena's illegal operation and saving the other creatures still trapped in her facility. "He planned this," Marcus said softly, stroking Ranger's fur as the wolf's breathing became more shallow. "He knew what would happen when you found us. He led us here not because he was trapped, but because he wanted witnesses when the truth came out." Elena's legs gave out, and she collapsed beside them, finally seeing her creation for what he truly was. Not a programmed weapon or a controllable pet, but a sentient being capable of sacrifice, strategy, and love beyond anything she'd thought possible. The years she'd spent trying to create the perfect obedient wolf had instead produced something far more remarkable, a creature with the wisdom to choose love over revenge, justice over escape. "Isabella," Elena whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch Ranger's fur. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mommy was so angry, so lost. I thought I was protecting other children, but I was just creating more victims." Ranger's eyes shifted to Elena's face for the first time since the confrontation began, and in those amber depths she found something she'd never expected to see again. Forgiveness. The wolf who had every reason to hate her was offering absolution with his dying breath, teaching her what she'd failed to learn in 5 years of obsession and grief. As the helicopters landed and federal agents surrounded the waterfall, Ranger drew his final breath in Marcus's arms. His death wasn't the tragic end Elena had intended, but rather the beginning of a reckoning that would expose the truth about her illegal research and free the other animals still suffering in her facility. In death, Ranger had achieved what he couldn't accomplish in life. He'd found a way to save not just Marcus, but all the other creatures Elena had imprisoned in the name of scientific progress. The wolf's final gift was justice, wrapped in the ultimate act of love. 6 months after Ranger's death, the morning sun painted the Montana wilderness in shades of gold and amber that reminded Marcus of his beloved companion's eyes. The federal investigation that followed that tragic dawn at Cascade Falls had uncovered a network of illegal wildlife trafficking that stretched across 3 states. But for Marcus, the most important outcome was much simpler. 12 wolf-dog hybrids had been rescued from Elena's facility and given a chance at the life Ranger had died protecting. Standing at the entrance to what was now officially known as Ranger's Haven Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Marcus watched as Sarah Chen conducted the morning health checks on their newest residents. The facility, built on 40 acres adjacent to his original property, represented everything Ranger had embodied: intelligence, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals willing to trust each other. The transformation hadn't been easy. The rescued animals had arrived traumatized, malnourished, and deeply suspicious of human contact. Some had been subjected to Elena's conditioning protocols for years, their natural behaviors suppressed by fear and artificial training. But with patience, proper veterinary care, and something Elena had never provided, genuine love, they were slowly remembering what it meant to be wolves. Luna, a female hybrid with silver markings reminiscent of Ranger's coat, had made the most remarkable progress. When she'd first arrived, she wouldn't make eye contact with humans and cowered at the slightest sound. Now she served as the pack's unofficial leader, helping newer arrivals adapt to their freedom while demonstrating the complex problem-solving abilities that made her species so remarkable. Watching her interact with Marcus brought bittersweet memories of Ranger's own journey from near death to trust. Dr. Elena Vasquez would spend the next 5 years in federal prison, but her sentence had been reduced due to her cooperation with authorities and the genuine remorse she'd shown after Ranger's death. The woman who'd once viewed wolves as problems to be controlled had become their unlikely advocate, using her scientific expertise to help design rehabilitation protocols that honored their intelligence while respecting their wild nature. "She writes to me every month," Marcus told Sarah as they watched Luna guide a frightened newcomer toward the feeding station. "Elena does? At first I thought I should throw the letters away, but I think Ranger would have wanted me to read them. He forgave her at the end. Maybe I should try to do the same." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of emotions that surrounded Elena's transformation. Grief makes people do terrible things sometimes. But it can also teach them to do better if they're willing to learn. The rehabilitation center had become more than just a sanctuary for rescued animals. It had evolved into a research facility dedicated to understanding the remarkable intelligence of wolf-dog hybrids through ethical observation rather than invasive experimentation. Universities sent graduate students to study the animals' problem-solving abilities, their complex social structures, and their capacity for emotional bonds with humans who treated them as partners rather than subjects. Marcus had discovered a talent he never knew he possessed: teaching. Groups of school children visited regularly to learn about wildlife conservation, and Marcus found himself sharing Ranger's story with wide-eyed students who couldn't believe a wolf could be so smart and loyal. These sessions always ended at Ranger's memorial stone, placed at the exact spot where he used to watch the sun rise each morning. The inscription, chosen by Marcus himself, read simply, "Ranger. He taught us that love is the bridge between two hearts, no matter how different they may be." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor who made Marcus's heart skip a beat. Linda Thompson, the veterinary nurse who'd been volunteering at the center for 3 months, approached with her 14-year-old daughter Amy in tow. Linda was a widow herself, having lost her husband to cancer 2 years earlier, and she understood the careful dance of two people learning to open their hearts again after devastating loss. "Amy has something she wants to ask you," Linda said, her warm brown eyes twinkling with mischief. She's been working up the courage for weeks. Amy, a bright teenager with her mother's gentle demeanor and her late father's stubborn determination, stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been watching how you work with the wolves, and I was wondering, could you teach me? I want to be a wildlife biologist someday, and Mom says you're the best teacher she's ever seen." The request hit Marcus like a physical blow, bringing back memories of Jake's own enthusiasm for the natural world. But instead of the crushing grief he'd expected, Marcus felt something lighter: hope mixed with purpose. This wasn't about replacing his son, but about honoring Jake's memory by nurturing another young person's passion for conservation. "I'd be honored to teach you, Amy," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I have one condition. You have to promise me you'll always remember that every animal has a story, and our job is to listen carefully enough to understand what they're trying to tell us." As the months passed, the unlikely family that had formed around Ranger's Haven continued to grow and evolve. Marcus and Linda's relationship developed slowly, built on shared values and mutual respect, rather than desperate loneliness. Amy became Marcus's most dedicated student, showing an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that reminded him daily of the healing power of purpose. The center's success attracted attention from conservationists worldwide, but Marcus remained focused on the mission Ranger had died protecting, creating a world where the remarkable intelligence and emotional capacity of wolves could be celebrated rather than feared. Each animal that found sanctuary at the facility represented a victory against the kind of exploitation Elena had once practiced. On the first anniversary of Ranger's death, Marcus stood once again at Cascade Falls, but this time he wasn't alone. Linda and Amy flanked him, along with Sarah and a small group of colleagues who'd become family through their shared commitment to the center's mission. Elena had been granted permission to attend via video call from prison, her face marked by genuine remorse as she spoke about the lessons Ranger had taught her. "He showed me that intelligence isn't something to be controlled or manipulated," Elena said, her voice barely audible through the speakers. "It's something to be respected and nurtured. Every day I spend in here, I think about the animals I hurt trying to recreate what was already perfect in him." As the sun set over the Montana wilderness, painting the sky in the same golden hues that had marked Ranger's final morning, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't known since Jake's death. His son's dream of protecting wild places lived on through Amy's enthusiasm and the center's growing success. Ranger's sacrifice had created ripples of positive change that would continue long after everyone present had joined him in whatever realm awaited those who loved purely and sacrificed willingly. The wolf's legacy wasn't just the animals he'd helped save or the facility built in his honor. It was the proof that love, once given freely, creates connections that transcend death itself. In learning to love Ranger, Marcus had rediscovered his capacity for hope. In losing him, he'd found his purpose. And in that purpose, both Jake's memory and Ranger's spirit would live forever, teaching new generations that the bridge between species is built not from dominance or control, but from the simple recognition that all creatures deserve dignity, respect, and love. This story reminds us that even in our darkest moments when grief feels like a permanent companion and purpose seems lost forever, life has a way of offering unexpected second chances. Marcus found his reason to hope again, not in replacing what he'd lost, but in opening his heart to love differently. Like so many of us who've weathered decades of life's storms, losing spouses, watching children grow distant, facing retirement's empty hours, Marcus discovered that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means allowing our broken hearts to make room for new connections, while honoring the memories that shaped us. Ranger didn't replace Jake any more than new friendships replace old ones. But he reminded Marcus that our capacity for love actually grows through loss, not despite it. The wolf's sacrifice created something beautiful, a sanctuary where other wounded creatures could heal, just as Marcus himself had healed. For those of us entering life's later chapters, this truth offers profound comfort. Our greatest heartbreaks can become our most meaningful contributions. Every loss teaches us deeper compassion. Every goodbye prepares us to say hello more meaningfully. We don't love less as we age. We love more wisely, more deliberately, more gratefully. What unexpected second chance has life offered you after a significant loss? How did opening your heart to something new help you honor what you'd lost, rather than replace it? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Marcus Sullivan slammed the brakes, his coffee mug hitting the dashboard as amber eyes blazed through the darkness like twin flames refusing to die. The massive shape he'd mistaken for roadkill wasn't dead at all. What lay bleeding on Highway 89's shoulder was no ordinary wolf. The creature's gaze pierced straight through him with an intelligence that made his breath catch. Human-like awareness flickering behind those golden irises, a desperate plea that spoke without words. Sarah Chen would later tell him she'd never seen anything like it in 20 years of veterinary practice. The way those eyes tracked movement, calculated, understood. Marcus's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, remembering his son Jake's voice. "Dad, what if we're not the only ones who really think and feel?" The wolf's massive frame shuddered with each labored breath, but those eyes never wavered, never blinked, holding secrets that could change everything. He had to choose now, drive away and pretend he'd seen nothing, or step into a mystery that would shatter everything he thought he knew about the world. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story.